It is said that an Irishman who dies while telling a story will surely be back to finish the job. Tony Riley is such a man, and he is here to tell an unusual story. There are 2 farms in Ireland's hilly countryside. In the Muldoon farm, Aoife and Chris are raising their daughter, and in another one, Tony and his sweet wife Mary are raising their son, Anthony, who tends to be untimely concerned by existential questions. It is possible, though, that every time he asks the night sky about his purpose, he is addressing the wrong entity, because the purpose of his life is hiding just down the road, over the hill, where little Rosemary Muldoon is, genuinely in love. One day, Rosemary sees a girl named Fiona making fun of Anthony. She won't have it, of course, so she comes down from her hiding place and confronts her. This is the first time love has stung her bitterly. Anthony takes Fiona's side and pushes her down. Chris, Rosemary's father, proves to be a great father then. He finds his young daughter questioning her existence and talks her out of a dark pit of self-mortification. He assures Rosemary that she's a queen, a white swan who can do anything, go anywhere, and be unstoppable. She's no mere girl, and the world is hers for the taking. In the next scene, Rosemary has grown, the gray hair on Chris's head has become white, and the black clouds crawling in the overcast sky remind our storyteller of the day Chris was buried. And so, now we see the pitch-black night, Anthony with his father, and a curtain of heavy rain. As they get home and argue over ordinary things, we understand that Mary, the woman of their house, passed away at this point, and both men struggle to keep the house and their hearts warm. Finally, they manage to smile and laugh over the habit Chris had of killing crows. This is when Aoife Muldoon comes in. It seems like she's taking the death of her husband pretty well. Anthony attempts to change his gleeful attitude once the widow has arrived, but Tony is too old to play the part. Aoife, however, isn't too offended by this. After a half-joking back and forth about the taste of glass and the smoke in the room, the discussion shifts to death. Tony states that Aoife has one leg in the grave already, and he expects his death by Christmas. Suddenly, Anthony gets interested in Rosemary's whereabouts. It seems like she's outside, smoking in a storm. She's crazy, and Anthony is universally inattentive if he fails to notice it too. Out of nowhere, as if Aoife wanted to further agitate Anthony, she asks Tony plainly what his plans are for his legacy. There's nothing to plan. There's nothing to decide. Anthony is in the air on the farm, but to his surprise, even his old man is doubtful about that. At first, with an old man's insolence, he questions Anthony's birth, saying that he's more of a Kelly than a Riley. Soon, however, he angrily states the real reason. Anthony is not a man made for soil. Reading his magazines all day, he will hardly be able to take care of the entire farm. The sudden shift in his old man's tone brings Anthony back to his sanity. He calmly tells him that he will find no pleasure in owning this farm, but regardless, he will faithfully carry out his responsibilities. He ought not to be criticized for it. With a longing for better company, he goes outside. In the rain, Rosemary smokes a pipe alone. They have a pleasant and calm conversation, talking of ordinary things, until Rosemary mentions how Anthony's bull has been coughing. They check it out, talking about the reasons for the bull's condition. After he decides to call the vet in the morning, Rosemary asks him about Fiona. Maybe the childhood grudge was too powerful to forget even to this point. Anthony, however, hasn't seen her since their childhood days. She's somewhere else now, with her husband and her children. Meanwhile, back in the house, Aoife tries to change Tony's mind about the farm. But the old man is too weary that it will cease its existence, or be sold into Anthony's hands. Suddenly, the thought of ending one's existence reminds Aoife of her husband's death, and the discussion is abruptly stopped. Outside, Anthony sympathizes with Rosemary and tries to share her grief. To change the subject, Rosemary tells a story about why Aoife thinks that glasses taste like teeth. We see how Anthony ends her sentence. They are close to each other because they have been destined to be close. Unexpectedly, a car arrives. Inside is bad news, as Anthony says. At first, Rosemary thinks that calling someone bad news is silly, but she soon finds out that it's true. Cleary doesn't even bother to pay his condolences to Aoife. He only tells Rosemary that her horse has escaped and jumped off the fence. Finally, she takes a halter and leaves. Meanwhile, in the house, Tony eats a ham he took from Aoife. Suddenly, he sits by her side, touches her arm, and starts speaking in such a manner that Aoife is certain he's about to propose. Maybe he is too desperate for his farm. Even the dog is taken aback. But Tony is after something else. There's a piece of land that blocks him from the road. The land belongs to her now, with its 2 gates that are always shut. It seems like he tried to talk Chris into selling that piece of land to him as well, but to no avail. Then Anthony appears to take her back to her house, and as she stands up to leave, she says that the piece of land Tony's talking about now belongs to Rosemary. Chris gave it to her after Anthony pushed her down in the very spot when she was 10 years old, so he should talk to Rosemary about it. Anthony's taken aback. He doesn't remember doing it. The horse named Blister proves to be hard to catch. Rosemary tries throughout the whole night, but Blister tests her patience. Come morning, however, she will have him back. Near the river, she ties him to a fence and sees Anthony's dog. That must mean he's here as well. In a round boat, he sits, swallowed by his thoughts. Abruptly, he stands up, talking to himself, and then, if that wasn't enough, he starts swinging his oar in the air as if he were fighting off an enemy in the air. When Rosemary calls him, he loses his feet and ends up in the water. It's too difficult to assure Rosemary that he was fishing. Kellys are the ones that fight the invisible enemies and jump in the water. They get back to their farms on foot, walking over and down green hills and meadows, talking about nothing of great value. However, the conversation suddenly lands on Blister's restlessness, and Anthony states that he understands him. Rosemary is surprised. Who would he not leave then? There's no fence in his way. Anthony, however, is stuck here. There's grass and the cattle that are living off it, and there's Anthony who is living off the cattle. Someone must be above that who's living off of him. That is why he can't leave. A sense of overwhelming responsibility binds him to his farm. He urges Rosemary to go, however. As their ways part, Rosemary repeats to Blister a portion of what Anthony just said. She feels an unstoppable urge to have him every time Anthony talks in that manner. Anthony receives a letter from America from Tony's nephew later that day. He prepares a stew and sits down to eat when Tony arrives. After the usual back and forth, Anthony urges him to open it and read it, but the old man seems reluctant for some reason. He will read it when he's alone, but Anthony doesn't back down. A quarrel starts between them. The fighting ends with a broken window and a demand for Anthony to get a wife. And so, in the next scene, we see him talking to Rosemary in his imagination, struggling to come up with his speech. A donkey is in front of him, acting in place of Rosemary. Suddenly, when Anthony goes down on one knee and performs his clumsy proposal, the bad news Cleary's head emerges from the fence, looking at this strange picture. He laughs at Anthony and brings bad news, as always. Tony is secretly selling his farm while his son is marrying a donkey. Enraged, Anthony runs after him. They cross the road right in front of Rosemary and Aoife. And as the girl stops her car and gets off, Anthony gives up on his pursuit. And when he tells Rosemary that Tony's about to sell the farm to Adam, his nephew, she gets angry too. If Anthony is not going to fight Tony about this, then she will. Rushing back to her car, she fails to hold back her tears. Now Aoife understands why Tony wanted that piece of land back. Out of nowhere, Rosemary remembers what her father told her when she was 10. She's a swan, she's a queen, and she can do anything. If the farm is sold, she'll never see Anthony again. So in the next scene, she calls Tony out. The old man notices that Rosemary is in love with his son, so after refusing to engage in disagreement, he decides to push that button. He says that he won't give the farm to Anthony because he will never get married and the place will have to go to auction, and no pleading or fighting from Rosemary's side will change that. Rosemary insists, however, that she believes he will come to her. She will wait. Tony is upset too. Rosemary will have to wait her whole life for nothing. And Tony himself is not getting any younger. He needs this thing settled. All the while, Aoife is screaming out of the car, urging Rosemary to seize the disagreement and take her home. So, the argument is cut short. However, both sides agree that it's not over. That evening, Anthony finds a beautiful ring in the house. Maybe Tony is wrong. Maybe he wants to marry. He goes to Rosemary's house, looks at her from a distance, and suddenly discovers that the ring is gone. And so, angry at his clumsiness, he leaves empty-handed. That night, he tells Tony very calmly that he's right. He will never get married. He can do whatever he likes with his land. It must have been tough for Tony to fully assimilate those words since, in the morning, Rosemary sees his car by the church. She brings this news to Aoife later that morning, concluding that there might be only one reason why a heathen man like Tony would be kneeling in the church. He knows he's wrong. That evening, Anthony catches up with a girl in a bar. Rosemary, Tony, and Aoife are gathered in the same place in the next scene, drinking and listening to music. At first, they talk about Anthony's whereabouts. He's in Killala, as it seems, and everybody knows why one goes to Killala. Next, the mother and daughter attempt to resume discussing the matter of Tony's farm, but he avoids it abruptly. Soon, to his surprise, Rosemary goes up on stage to sing something. Before she starts, she announces that she sings this song to remember a certain woman named Mary, who sang this song to her grave. A Wild Mountain Time is the name of the song, and as Rosemary sings it, Tony's mouth gets tighter as if to hold a desperate cry inside his mouth, and his eyes get watery. He shoots a sorrowful look at Rosemary, singing a song that his wife used to sing. When it's over, Rosemary gets down, kisses her mother, and leaves. Now Tony is the one resuming the talk. He only wants to do what's right for the farm. But as Aoife argues tenderly, farms do not have a sense of right and wrong. It seems like these words have cracked Tony's resistance. The morning comes, and we get back to Anthony, who's still with that woman. Both are walking on drunken feet. They decide to go to a cemetery. Sitting there over the wall, the girl decides to tell him her worst secret since they will never see each other again. The secret is truly terrible, but Anthony is confident that he can top it. We don't hear what it is, but the woman breaks into laughter and falls off the wall after hearing it. By the afternoon, Anthony's uncle and Adam arrive in Ireland from New York. He greets them at the airport and takes his uncle home, while Adam rents a car. Today is Tony's 75th birthday, and as the brothers meet, they discuss the upcoming party. The weather is hideous and rainy, but the party is held nonetheless. Suddenly, as the bad news Cleary tells bad stories to the children, Adam arrives in a Rolls-Royce. Adam seems to be proud of himself, but Anthony is cynical. Later, when he's sitting alone on a bench, his cousin comes up to him and hands him a present. It's a white raincoat. Adam introduces himself to Rosemary too. Right away, he goes ahead and asks him to sell the piece of land. But it's not so easy to allure Rosemary Muldoon. All the while, Anthony is in the meadow, searching for something with a metal detector. After he loses his feet, the two resume their conversation but leave the matter of the land. Adam's tone seems to have a feeble flavor of flirting, but Rosemary is only amused by it. Adam invites her to New York, but Rosemary's settled here, and after her abrupt refusal, Adam understands that she's waiting for Anthony. Adam doesn't understand any of them. Why would somebody cling to a couple of gates and loneliness like that? And then Rosemary makes it clear to him that they will never understand each other. Bringing a Rolls-Royce to a farm for a show is unquestionable evidence for that. After Rosemary leaves, the cousins go to take care of the cattle. The animals can't recognize Anthony in his new coat. Adam asks him how many acres he has, the same question that he asked Rosemary too, and got the same answer from both of them. They don't know. Being a farmer is not the same as being the owner of one. Adam will never truly be a farmer because he does not understand it. Aoife is carried to the hospital that night. She's been feeling terrible as of late. As they are waiting outside the intensive care unit, Tony calls Adam to tell him something. He won't sell him the farm. Yes, it's about Rosemary and Anthony, and he has no idea what they will do, but he can't be the one to break them apart. The gods would fault him for it. Adam attempts to object, but the old man is irresistible. Rosemary puts on black the next morning. The illness proved fatal for Aoife, unfortunately. Tony gets sick too. In the following scene, he urges Anthony to roll the oxygen tank out of his room and fetch him his pipe. As Anthony lights the pipe for his old man, they talk of a certain star that used to hang low above the horizon. Anthony used to gaze at it all the time when he was a kid, and now he sees it again. After the old man coughs from the smoke, he takes it away and sits on the edge of the bed. And then Tony starts speaking to him, sensing that he must clear his conscience and settle the relationship with his son so that he doesn't carry that worry in the afterlife. And he knows the afterlife is already there, knocking at the door. So he tells Anthony that the farm is his, and he apologizes for the unfaithfulness he had toward him. Then, Tony tells a touching story, suddenly saying that he had no love for Mary at first. But one day, out of the fields and through the sunshine in the most mysterious way, something gave way, and love found him. He then sold those gates so that he could get a new golden ring for her, and every day after that was a celebration. He assures Anthony that love will someday find him too, and Anthony embraces him, red with tears, forgiving everything. Finally, before he leaves the room, Tony asks him not to roll in the oxygen tank anymore. He'll try sleeping without it to wake up with Mary. And as Anthony leaves, the star just above the horizon flickers and fades away. In the following scene, there is a discussion between Rosemary and Anthony that changes a lot between them. At first, the things that they hide from each other are evident behind their words, as both try to be caring while attempting to hide them. Soon, after talking about the crows and the things that might be considered only by a farmer, the discussion lands on a fence erected between them. Anthony did it. He's been building that fence in his head as well. Rosemary asks him if he's happy now that the farm is finally his and the responsibility to take care of it is comfortably resting on his shoulders. But Anthony is far from being happy. He's been having dreams full of people, even though he spends days alone. He's distancing himself from everyone, even Rosemary, a girl whom he wanted to marry and the girl who goes to church only to see him. And he knows her feelings too, but with his fields empty, silent, and loveless, he urges her to leave this country. Rosemary is angry. She tries to deny that he means it at first, but once she realizes that Anthony speaks from his heart, a fire of rage erupts in her heart. Finally, just out of spite, she states that maybe she will leave, and after he's gone, Rosemary remembers her father's words once more. She's a swan, a queen who can do anything she wants. Nothing can stand in her way. And so, yes, she will leave this damned country, and all the sheep and the cattle be damned. Rosemary has been hiding her white dress all along, before this moment. As she arrives home, she starts the music and shows her true self in the white dress, free, stubborn, and pure. She leaves Ireland and goes to New York, a city where Adam is. In the following scene, they are walking together. From their conversation, we understand that she's here for only 2 days. Tomorrow she'll be living. Back in Ireland, her sense of purpose vanished. And that's why she decided to flee and fly all this way. She has tickets for the ballet and wants Adam to take her. And so, that evening, they go to see Swan Lake. Sitting there, watching the white swan take the stage, Rosemary sees so much of herself in the girl dancing beneath the lights that she fails to hold back tears in her eyes. Afterward, however, as they sit down for dinner, Adam challenges her sense of romanticism. One must concentrate on what's real before plunging oneself into the world of fairy tales. That's the road to happiness. Even the most romantic thing, love, progresses to marriage, the most practical thing. Rosemary knows why he pushes that button. Adam wants to denounce Anthony and assure her that he'll never marry her, thus keeping her for herself. Rosemary asks him if he ever had a childhood dream. He has, but he let it go since those dreams make adults miserable. A certain coupe is the evidence for that. As they get back outside, by the river and the lights of the distant city, Adam suddenly pulls her closer and kisses her firmly. Rosemary is terrified and scared all at once. Even the next day, the effect of that kiss remains with her. She's been saving herself for Anthony this whole time. Her father must have been right, she truly is the white swan. At night, Adam calls Anthony, telling him that he's coming to Ireland. He also requests his permission for something. We do not hear what it is, but Anthony abruptly agrees with him until he hangs up and regrets his spinelessness right away. Decisively, he digs out his metal detector from the storeroom and goes into the fields. Come morning, some mysterious voice inside Rosemary calls to Anthony, and so she rises from the table and goes out into the gloomy meadow. Meanwhile, Anthony is still looking. Rosemary finds him in the same place he once pulled her down. Once he catches a glimpse of her, Anthony turns back hilariously and tries to leave, but Rosemary won't have it. She takes him back into her house and orders him to open the shutters. This kind of weather doesn't go easy on the houses with open shutters, but Rosemary will face everything that dares to come at her this morning. Fear has left her. Anthony complains but does whatever he wants. Suddenly, he hears a terrible rumble from the stable. The horse has gone crazy. Anthony is led inside after a terrible thunderclap comes ahead and the rain comes pelting down. Despite his complaining and grumbling, Rosemary still maintains an upbeat attitude. Suddenly, they see Flossie, Anthony's dog, outside. They let him in, and Anthony is given a towel to mop the floor. Meanwhile, Rosemary starts humming Swan Lake. Once he's done, she mentions the untidiness and apologizes for it. Anthony is eager to run away, to flee, so he sees a chance and tells her that he'll go now and come by some other time. But Rosemary knows better. She sits him down and offers him a Guinness. Of course, Anthony doesn't want it. He pleads with her not to open it, but she does it anyway, so now he might as well send it to his belly, or else it would be wasted. As a last resort, Anthony asks her to split it, thus splitting the time he has to stay in half, and Rosemary yields. Sitting there with the cups half full, Anthony looks outside and mentions a certain rope around his throat that would go well with this kind of gloomy weather. Rosemary is abashed. She stops him abruptly and confesses that she's been thinking about it too. She even has a loaded rifle in her storeroom, kept as a last resort. Anthony is surprised, so Rosemary shows him, proving that it's true. Then she tells him of her terrible sorrow that's been eating her insides. The real reason is obvious, but she blames it on quitting cigarettes. As they sit down again, Rosemary tells him that the only thing lighting her days are the scarce signs in the world around her. Anthony concludes that it's anxiety. He has it too. The feeling boils inside his head as well, and he hates them. Perhaps he thinks that those words might be proof to Rosemary that he's not the one for her. But Rosemary acts as if she likes a man with no feelings. She feels that she's losing him at this point, so she offers him a sandwich and stands up to fetch it despite his resistance. Once she gets back, she tries to be more tender. Perhaps that will make him stay, but he swiftly stands up and says that his cousin is coming from America. Rosemary is ashamed. She suspects the reason but is afraid of it. Question after question, she finally squeezes the truth out of him. Adam is coming down to find a new wife, more specifically, take a look at Rosemary, as Anthony says. Now Rosemary is in a rage. The one man that she's desperately in love with exhibits her for Adam to take a look at. How can he be so ignorant of what's in front of him? Seeing her anger, Anthony decides to fight fire with fire. He states that quitting cigarettes has changed her temper and attempts to leave once more. Before he reaches to open the door, however, Rosemary threatens to take the gun out and pushes him to the door. She's blazing with fury. Taken aback by her temper, he stands in a doorway as Rosemary anxiously goes into the kitchen once more, calms down, and asks him to sit down, offering to take him to the airport herself so that he isn't late for Adam's landing. And so he wearily bends to her will and sits down. After she fetches one more Guinness, the conversation resumes on a much calmer note. But soon after, Rosemary gets interested in his orientation, and Anthony leaps up from his seat, denying it. Then, as they sit down once more, Rosemary revoltingly asks him why he would give her out for Adam. Anthony enumerates a few reasons why it's a good idea, but Rosemary loathes men like Adam. It's the men like Anthony she likes. Finally, to tempt him at last, she talks of the force of women and how they have the power to change a man's life. But Anthony keeps silent, so Rosemary has nothing to lose at this point. She confesses all her feelings and the true reasoning behind all of her actions. She even mentions going to New York and kissing Adam. As the plane in which Adam is talking with the newly met girl gets quite fond of her, the weather quietens down at the farms. Rosemary is eager to get to the bottom of Anthony's indifference toward her. She asks if it's Fiona. Maybe he got a terrible rejection the first time he opened his heart to a girl, but Anthony denies it too. Rosemary is past desperate at this point. She goes on to ask whether he has ever thought of the roundness of her forms beneath her dresses. This takes Anthony back. He acts surprised, so Rosemary just demands that he tell the secret that he holds. Anthony is fighting his demons. He's afraid of the things he must say, but somehow Rosemary assures him to come out. there's nothing that can surprise her. So, finally, the ice breaks and he yields the secret. It's the most unexpected thing that anyone can say. Rosemary might have been wrong in assuming that nothing would have surprised her. Anthony believes that he's a honeybee. After Rosemary makes him repeat it, she rushes to the car. As they drive through the farmland, the sky clears, and Rosemary tries to believe her ears, repeating his words endlessly. Surely, it explains it all. She asks what is on his mind. Anthony replies that she's a flower, and suddenly this delusion doesn't seem so bad after all. But he urges her to go to Adam and marry him. Hearing this, Rosemary gets interested in knowing if he ever thought of marrying her, and then Anthony confesses it to her. How he went to her home, only to discover that the ring that was meant for her was gone. He believes that it was destiny. He lost that ring because they were never meant to be together. A wide smile stretches across Rosemary's face then, and she decides to go the other way, breaking into the fence that Anthony erected. She says that once in their lives, everybody sees themselves as something else. His delusion might even be normal. Rosemary gets near the huge tree on the riverbank and fails to wheel away. They crush into it, and as they get out, heavy rain starts pelting down once more. Anthony cannot decide what he's mad about, so he curses the undeceived weather. There, Rosemary realizes that Anthony needs help. Love can be scary. Avoiding it might take a man down the most unusual roads. The man in front of her has been afraid of love. Avoiding it might take a man down the most unusual roads. The man in front of her has been afraid of love his whole life, and this terror has been so forceful that he even led himself to believe that he was not a human and thus not responsible for love. If she wants to bring her back into the world of sanity, then first she must throw herself into his delusional world. And it mustn't be that tough for her since she half believes that she's a swan herself. And so she says to him, this belief doesn't make her unworthy of love. But Anthony is still reluctant. He needs something real to grasp onto as well. Reality has always told him that they are not meant for each other. So, Rosemary gets to her knees, and suddenly, the golden ring appears in her hands. She found it by her gate and thought it was a sign sent from the heavens. She offers the ring back to Anthony, but at this point, the man has changed. He tells Rosemary that it's hers and kisses her firmly. Once they break apart, he sees the sun shining on the top of the hill in front. There is no rain there, so he takes Rosemary into his arms and starts walking toward it. Meanwhile, once the woman Adam met at the place finds him, he understands that he's been stood up. This might be the beginning of their relationship. And, finally, as Anthony and Rosemary reach the hill, he confesses one last thing. The voice in the fields wasn't urging him to just go but to go to Rosemary. And the dead Irishman who returned to life finally gets to tell the last of his story.